It begins with cold, not the bitter cold of a snowstorm, nor the biting frost of a howling wind, but the quiet, creeping chill that settles into your bones before you even open your eyes. The kind of cold that clings to the tips of your fingers and nestles beneath your knees, winding its way through the woven blankets of coarse wool and the rough straw-stuffed bedding beneath you. There is no pillow, only a folded tunic tucked beneath your neck. There is no mattress, only a wooden platform lined with animal skins and woven mats. Somewhere nearby, someone is snoring slow, deep, rhythmic. The sound rises and falls like the breath of the building itself. And then, quite suddenly, there shifts. A draft curls in from the far end of the longhouse, pulling with it the scents of wood smoke, damp earth, and old ash. A child coughs, a dog growls quietly and stretches. A rooster crows, distant and thin, its call echoing from beyond the turf roof, beyond the wooden walls, beyond the safety of the hall. Morning has come to the village. You sit up slowly, careful not to bump the low beams overhead. Your back aches in strange places, as if unused muscles have been called into new service. Your hands, when you flex them, are rough and thick, workman's hands. Your feet, wrapped in cloth and fur, are stiff from yesterday's tasks. You are not in your own time. You are in the age of the Norse. You are not a visitor here. You are part of this world, living it moment by moment. The interior of the longhouse is dim and golden. Light filters in through narrow gaps in the roof line, illuminating dust motes that dance like spirits in the air. A central hearth smolders with the last of last night's fire, embers glowing faintly beneath. Blackened logs, or you people, begin to stir. A woman stokes the fire with a practiced hand, then rises to fetch water. A man ties the leather of his belt with quiet purpose. A boy sleeps with a carved wooden horse tucked beneath his chin. You wrap a wool cloak around your shoulders and rise. The soles of your feet press into the wooden planks. Smoothed by years of barefoot steps, you pass the fire slowly and head toward the door, not a modern door with a handle, but a thick plank of wood lashed with hide and pulled aside with a grunt. As it creaks open, the morning mist pours in like a tide. Outside, the village lies quiet in the fog. Turf roof houses huddle close together, their outlines softened by the mist. Chickens peck at the frozen ground. Smoke curls from a few chimney holes, rising into the gray sky like thin fingers searching for the sun. The air is full of the scent of damp moss, peat, and the sea, always the sea. A woman passes by carrying a woven basket full of turnips. She nods to you without smiling. A boy pushes a wooden cart through the muddy path, its wheels groaning, and the distance, the lowing of cows echoes from the field. There are no clocks here, no alarms. The day begins not with a buzz or a beep, but with chores, with motion, with duty, with breath. You are handed a bucket by someone, a girl of about 14, her hair tied with woolen string. "Fetch water," she says, simply, as though it is the most obvious thing in the world. And it is. So you take the bucket and walk the narrow, muddy path that winds down toward the well. At the well, an older man is already drawing water, grumbling about the cold. His face is deeply lined, his beard long and speckled with frost. He hands you the rope when he's done, without a word. The bucket descends with a creak, then returns full and cold. The water smells faintly of earth and iron. You carry it back without spilling mostly. When you return, breakfast is being shared in the longhouse. Not a feast, but a portion of oat porridge, thick and salted. A strip of dried fish rests on each wooden plate. There are no forks. You eat with your fingers or a shared spoon. A dog hovers near your feet, hopeful and patient. Conversations are few. Words are precious in the morning. Eyes are focused. You hear the crackle of the hearth, the scrape of wooden bowls, the shifting of boots on the floor. Outside, the fog begins to lift, revealing the long shape of the fjord, silver in the early light. Today, you will work, though you do not yet know at what. Perhaps in the fields, turning soil or weeding. Perhaps with the animals, perhaps with the women preparing root vegetables for storing or helping to twist wool into thread. Everyone works. Everyone is needed. And no one is free. From the rhythm of the day, the fog has lifted, but the chill remains. The sun creeps low across the sky, casting long shadows that stretch like reaching arms over the village. This far north, even the daylight feels cautious, uncertain. It never rises far, and it never stays long. You are handed an axe. It is not polished or ceremonial. It is not the kind you'd imagine on the battlefield or displayed on a wall. It is practical, blunt, from years of use. Its handle is worn smooth by the calloused hands of those who came before you. There is no question. You are expected to chop wood up near the edge of the village. A stand of alder trees has been felled. Their branches are stripped, and their trunks lie like sleeping beasts across the frozen earth. You are not alone. A boy, no more than 12, splits kindling beside you with methodical grace. An older woman sharpens blades on a whetstone, her breath puffing like smoke in the cold air. Your fingers, still stiff with sleep, wrap around the axe. You swing, the blade thunks shallowly into the wood. It bounces slightly, jolting your wrists. You try again, a better strike this time. The wood cracks slightly. It will take time, and energy, and breath. The task is not glamorous. The sun inches across the sky, your hands grow numb, and your back begins to ache. The axe grows heavier. Splinters fly. The stack grows. This is life here. Not war, not glory, but work. And still the village hums around you, near the longhouse. Women are preparing root vegetables, slicing turnips and onions, drying greens to store for winter. They speak softly in Norse, not to gossip but to instruct. A younger girl is learning to clean fish. Her hands are red from the cold, her brow furrowed in concentration. She winces as the fish's scales flick into her eyes. A patient ant corrects her posture. On the other side of the compound, an older man repairs a fence, weaving branches through upright posts. He hums tunelessly as he works, his fingers precise, his rhythm steady. Over by the animal sheds, sheep bleat quietly, pressing together for warmth. A boy scrapes dung from the floor with a flat shovel made of horn and ashwood. He does not complain. No one complains. You pause in your labor, stretching your back. You are handed a horn cup, warm mead, thin and spiced with juniper. It tastes of smoke and earth and something slightly sweet. It is meant not for celebration, but for strength. A break is rare. You drink. The village elder passes by. His face is a map of yours. He nods to you but says nothing. His cloak is made from wool dyed with woad, and the brooch at his shoulder is carved bone. He smells faintly of leather and salt. You wonder how many winters he has seen. Later, in the fading light, the children are set to gather dry moss and birch bark for kindling. They carry small sacks and work in groups. They laugh sometimes, but their work is real. Everyone contributes. There is a rhythm to it all, a quiet pulse beneath the cold and the labor. And knowing this work matters, it will keep the hearths burning. It will keep the frost from crawling too close when the snow returns. When the sun dips low behind the trees, the sky turns lavender and ash. Dinner is not served, it is earned. A stew bubbles over the central hearth. It smells of onions, barley, and a little salted pork. You eat cross-legged on the floor, sharing bread torn by hand. Someone begins to sing. It is not loud, not festive. A woman's voice, low and slow, chanting something old and haunting. Others join, not in harmony but in remembrance. The melody drifts upward and clings to the beams like smoke. You are tired, your hands are blistered, your muscles ache in places you had forgotten, but your bowl is warm. Your cloak is wrapped around your shoulders, and the fire flickers gently nearby. You have not done much by the standards of your own time, but here in this world you have earned your place for the day. You will sleep deeply tonight, and tomorrow the work will begin again. Morning returns. But it is not announced by alarm clocks or mobile screens. It arrives in smells, the scent of damp wool, of ash still warm in the hearth, and most strongly of smoke. When you rise, your tunic clings slightly with yesterday's sweat, and the soles of your feet protest each step on the cold floor. Yet you are already behind. The longhouse has been stirring since well before first light. Someone is grinding barley the stone quern, the rhythm slow and steady. Others have gone to fetch water, a task that demands patience, shoulders, and strong fingers to keep the buckets balanced on the yoke. You are ushered to a task of your own today. It is fish. Rows of silver-bellied herring glisten on wooden racks beside the longhouse. Some are fresh, others halfway dried. The process is precise, not ritualistic, but deliberate. You learn quickly that preservation here is not simply a chore. It is survival, salted, smoked, dried, or buried in pits of earth and ash. Each technique is born of necessity and deep memory. You sit beside a woman named Brynhild. Her fingers move with practiced grace as she salts and layers the fish in a barrel. Her voice is quiet but not cold. She explains, in clipped but patient tones, the rhythms of the season. How much is stored depends on how long the winter lasts. How deep the smoke must cure depends on the thickness of the wood used. Everything has weight. Everything is measured in time, not in minutes or grams, but in how long a family might eat when the frost seals the world outside. Inside the longhouse, smoke hangs in the rafters like an old spirit. The roof is vetted, but there are still tastes of burnt alder and meat. It clings to the hair, the skin, the fabric of daily life. You cannot escape it, and slowly you stop trying. The main hearth is the heart of it all, not just for cooking, but for warmth, for talk, for repair. Around it, tools are sharpened. Stories are shared. A young man weaves leather strips into a new harness while a child watches, chewing on a scrap of dried root. An elder speaks of winters past, of a snow so high that the doors would not open, of a hunt that yielded a boar fat enough to feed the village for a week. There is no hierarchy around the fire, only place. You are given one not because you are special, but because there is room. That is the nature of things here. Lunch is not a meal served on a schedule. It is a pause, found in the rhythm of work. A flatbread, still warm from the hearthstone. A chunk of cheese, hard and strong. A shared bowl of broth, onion, parsley root, a hint of vinegar. You do not eat alone. No one does. Later, a young boy beckons you to help turn the grain in the drying loft. It is hot there, unexpectedly so. Smoke drifts upward through slats, warming the space just enough to keep the barley from spoiling. You rake gently with a wooden paddle. The air is thick with dust, and your throat burns. Still, the boy works beside you without complaint. When you offer to take more of the load, he shakes his head, not out of pride, but because it is his task. He is proud of doing it himself. As the sky darkens, the village shifts once more. The animals are brought in, the chickens settled, the sheep counted, the fires fed again with carefully dried wood. You help split more logs. The axe now feels less foreign in your hands. Dinner is heartier, a pottage thickened with peas and wild herbs. Someone has added a few dried apples for sweetness. The children trade bites. The elders chew slowly, with satisfaction. Tonight, the story is sung, not spoken, a ballad passed from lips to ears for generations. It speaks of the old father, of fjords and fire, of a woman who turned into a bear to protect her kin. The fire flickers with each word, the shadows nodding along. You realize, in the quiet that follows, that no part of the day has been wasted, not a single motion. Every act, no matter how small, has its place in the survival of the group. You are beginning to understand, but your hands still ache, and your back still tender. This is only the third day, and winter has not yet begun. The morning sky is not blue. It is a weight, low and gray, heavy as a wool cloak soaked in river water. It presses on your shoulders the moment you step outside, and every breath you take feels close to the earth. The air smells of rain long before the drops begin to fall of wet bark, trampled moss, and smoke that's had too much time to sit still. A storm is coming. The village knows, but no one panics. There is no frenzy, no rush to shelter. The movements are precise, prepared, patient. Tasks shift. What cannot be done outside is brought indoors. What must remain out is lashed down, covered in hides, or buried beneath straw and stone. You're handed a leather hood, stiff with age, patched in places, and asked to help move firewood to the main hall. It isn't stacked neatly, but built into crisscrossed mounds that breathe, that stay dry even in a week of rain. Every placement is thought through. When you misplace a log, a quiet voice corrects you, not out of scorn, but experience. You learn not by being taught, but by being folded into the doing. As noon draws near, the first drops fall cold, wide, and scattered. The dirt turns quickly to mud, and the thatched roofs begin to hiss under the rain's steady rhythm. You are soaked through in moments, yet none around you seem to notice. Or perhaps they've simply accepted that wetness is part of the day inside the longhouse. The fire is fed fiercely, and people gather not in idleness, but in redirection. Wool is spun, arrowheads are filed, tunics are mended. An older man scrapes sinew from a deer hide, his knife following grooves carved by years of muscle memory. A woman beside him braids cord from twisted flax, humming quietly. Children play a guessing game with carved bones. A baby sleeps in a cradle suspended from the rafters, rocked by the rhythm of footsteps and flickering light. And through it all, the rain, tapping, sliding, pulling at the edges. But the longhouse holds thick beams, wide timbers, walls chinked with clay and moss. You feel for the first time that the house is not a building, it is a body. Its ribs creak, its breath is warm, its skin smells of smoke and straw. The hours stretch. Time here is not measured by the ticking of clocks, but by the slow change of light, by how far the fire has burned down, by how full the water buckets remain. You begin to notice the subtle conversations spoken not in words but in glances, the sharing of space, the shifting of chores, the silence that settles not because nothing is said, but because nothing needs to be. Someone passes you a carved cup filled with hot meat, the sweetness welcome against the chill. You sip carefully. It warms you more than the fire. Later in the afternoon, the storm breaks open, a full-bodied roar of sky and wind. You watch from a narrow slit in the timber, watching trees bend like old men in pain. The chickens squawk, and settled, a distant crash tells of a fallen limb. But no one moves. The longhouse holds. By evening, the worst has passed. The rain becomes a whisper. The sky remains heavy, but less threatening. Dinner is quiet. Warm porridge with foraged mushrooms, pickled turnip, and a small portion of smoked trout. No one wastes a bite. Bones are picked clean. The broth is drunk to the last drop. That night, as you lie again on your straw pallet, you understand something elemental. The village does not fight nature. It listens, it adjusts, it bends where others would break. You realize how loud your old world was, how fragile, how you once believed comfort was control. But here, comfort is resilience. Survival is not won in great gestures, but in calm, deliberate endurance. Rain continues to fall outside, and yet you sleep. There is no weekend in the Viking village. No Sunday slumber or sacred day of rest. No ark carved out for leisure, and no calendar with boxes to cross off. There is only the season, and the season always demands something of you. This morning, it asks for toil. You wake to the smell of damp wool and wood smoke. The hearth still glows faintly, a quiet coal bed of yesterday's flame. Someone has already risen to stoke it too. Breathe warmth back into the hall. You join the rhythm, not out of invitation, but necessity. There are no chores here, only living, and living is labor. Outside, the ground is thick with yesterday's rain. Your boots squelch through mud as you carry buckets to the stream. There is no well in this village. The water is fetched daily, every day. The stream runs clear and cold, and you kneel at its edge, fingers red from the chill, careful not to tip the heavy wooden pail. You slip once on the return, soaking your foot to the ankle. No one laughs, no one cuddles. One woman offers you a flat stone to place in your boot, a quiet trick to keep it from squelching too much. You nod your thanks. By midday, you are helping prepare fish for drying, small silver perch strung onto racks with twine. The older children assist, slicing gently, fingers deft despite their size. They have done this many times. Their hands know the motion even if their minds wander. The village must always be thinking of the next meal. Food is not a comfort here. It is a calculation. What can be stored? What must be salted? What will keep through frost? There is no room for waste. The bones are saved for broth, the heads for bait. Even the skins in time may become cord or binding or patch. In the distance, someone is splitting logs. The rhythm as steady as a drum. Thunk, thunk, thunk. You will take your turn too. When your arms are less tired from hauling, everyone works. Even the elderly contribute, weaving or sharpening or teaching. They are not retired. They are repositories of practice. The sun does not track your progress. There are no milestones. Only the slow shift of shadow across the yard. When hunger speaks, you pause to eat rye bread, tough and dry, dipped in broth. You sit on a stone or lean against the wall. There is no dining table, no break room, just shared silence and chewing. As the day presses on, you are asked to help mend a roof, to climb the low ladder and pass fresh bundles of thatch to a man crouched near the ridge. You grip the rungs tightly, your arms trembling from unfamiliar effort. The air smells of hay and sap and sweat. From above, the village looks almost delicate, a scatter of huts among the trees. But you know better now. Delicate is not the word. Enduring is. By evening, your back aches, your fingers burn. There is dirt beneath your nails, and your skin is scratched from bramble. Yet no one congratulates you, no one comments, because this is the rhythm. This is every day. The longhouse is warm again by dusk. Children lie in heaps, legs entangled, eyes already fluttering shut. Someone sings low a lullaby, or maybe a prayer. It's hard to tell. The melody is simple, repetitive. It rises and falls like a slow tide. You lie on your straw bed and watch the smoke curl into the rafters. Tomorrow will be the same. And the day after. And the one after that. This is the weight of work. This is how people survive. And this is why. Perhaps you wouldn't. By now, the rhythm of village life has settled in your bones like dab through wool. But today, you are led not to the fields or the hearth, but to the smithy. It sits at the edge of the settlement, not because it is hidden, but because it demands its own space, its own reverence. Smoke and sparks do not mix well with hay and timber, and so the forge rests by itself, close to the stream that cools the iron and quenches the sweat of those who tame it. The air changes the moment you step near. It is thicker here, alive with scent, of scorched earth, of hot metal, of damp charcoal and sweat. It clings to your throat and nestles in your hair, even before you cross the threshold. You hear it, the rhythmic striking of hammer on iron, each blow like a heartbeat in the belly of the world. The smith does not speak much. He is large, not in height but in presence, wide-shouldered, deep-chested, arms shaped by years of repetition. He nods at you once and gestures to the bellows. You understand. The work begins with heat. You pump air into the flames, feeding. Then with breath drawn through leather lungs, the forge glows brighter, angrier, until the coals shimmer white in their center. The smith places a bar of iron into the flame, turning it carefully, his face unreadable beneath soot and shadow. And then, when the color is right, when the metal is no longer itself but something half liquid, half light, he lifts it with tongs and brings it to the anvil. You watch as he begins. Strike, strike, turn, strike. It is music in its way. No tune you'd hum, but a rhythm deep and steady, a language older than speech. You hand him the tools as he asks, fumbling sometimes, earning a curt grunt when you pass the wrong one. It is not unkindness, it is precision. A mistake here doesn't waste minutes, it wastes days. It can warp a blade, sap a nail, fail a hinge in the middle of winter. He shapes the iron into something new today, a simple hinge for a gate. Nothing glorious, but when it's done, it will hold back livestock, keep the little ones from wandering, keep the wolves out, small things, but vital. You're learning that everything here is like that. Nothing wasted, nothing made just for beauty. Everything with purpose. The forge is not just a place of work. It is a place of stories. He shows you how to harden the blade of a knife, quenching it in oil, then returning it to flame. He tells you that iron remembers how it was treated, too harsh, and it will crack, too soft, and it will bend. Just like people, he says, with a rare smile. You look around the smithy, hooks, nails, fish spears, hinges, a broken shield in the corner awaiting repair, a cooking spit, a rusted key, a row of iron rivets, each one identical and yet subtly imperfect. You help file the edge of a newly forged scythe. He lets you hold it up to the light. It gleams faintly, catching the firelight like a shard of dawn. Your arms are shaking from the work, your face flushed from the heat, your back slick with sweat. But the pride, unexpected and quiet, blooms somewhere between your ribs. As the sky outside dims, you douse the forge together, steam rising like ghosts. The embers hiss, reluctant to die. The tools are set in their places. The floor is swept, though soot still clings to every stone. The smith places a hand on your shoulder as you leave, rough, brief, firm. You earned something today. And perhaps you realize the blacksmith does not merely make iron, he makes the village possible. He is its spine, its shield, its silent craftsman of survival, long before dawn, when frost still clings to the edge of the thatch and breath hangs like ghosts in the rafters. The women of the village rise. The day you rise with them. There is no rooster here, only the quiet scrape of wool against wool as someone pulls on their cloak, the low whistle of wind slipping through the walls, the muffled creak of old wood. You sit up in the dark, surrounded by the subtle warmth of slumbering bodies. Families sleep together in the longhouse, shielded from the cold by closeness, by breath, by the quiet patience of morning. Someone stirs the fire, always the fire. It is never truly out, coals hidden under ash glow faintly, and with practiced hands, they're coaxed back to life. A small flame flickers, then grows. And the hearth, that most sacred place, awakens. Again. Breakfast is no feast, a thick barley porridge, ladled into wooden bowls. Sometimes berries, if they were dried and saved. Sometimes goat's milk, sometimes just salt. You eat it slowly, seated near the fire, while a child braids her sister's hair beside you and an older woman spins flax without ever glancing down. You are not here for rest. You are here to work. Today, the hearth is your teacher. The woman in charge, you've heard others call her Swala, is quiet but stern. She presses a spindle into your hand and shows you slowly how the fibers twist. Your first attempts are disastrous. The thread is lumpy, uneven. It snaps. She does not scold, only hands you more. Again, she says, the cloth remembers. Your hands, all day you spin. All day you learn that cloth is more than cloth. It is warmth in winter. It is dignity. It is trade and currency, gift and legacy. When a Viking woman weaves, she weaves the very rhythm of her household. She is not idle. She is not lesser. She is the structure upon which the day hangs. Later, you help comb wool thick, tangle, musky, until it lies soft as clouds. You twist it with practiced fingers. Others dye it with crushed plants, boiling the fabric in large pots that leave your hands red and raw. The color clings, deep greens, dusky browns, the faintest yellow from lichen, all natural, all earned. You then torn tunics with a bone needle. You patch a child's cloak. You knot the ties of shoes. You sit with the others near the light of the fire, and for a moment your breath joins theirs, not as an outsider, not as an observer, but as someone within the story, someone who understands. When evening comes, the longhouse fills again with laughter, with the clatter of spoons, with tired limbs and smoke, and stories told softly beneath the eaves. A boy hands you a square of cloth, rough spun, uneven. Yours, he grins. You'll get better, and maybe you will not, but as your hands ache, and your back throbs from sitting bent for hours, and the smoke clings to your eyes, you realize something profound. This is not the labor of leisure. This is the labor that holds everything together. And though you will sleep tonight on straw and wake again in cold, you will do so wrapped in cloth you helped make. You will sleep not as a guest, but as a thread in the very tapestry of this place. The wind has changed. You notice it not by the trees, which remain as still as ever, but by the scent it carries, faint salt, mingled with smoke. Somewhere, far off toward the shore, the tide is shifting. The gulls are quieter today. The clouds have come low. It is the kind of morning when people speak in hushed tones, and doors remain closed just a little longer than usual. You step out into the chilled air, pulling your cloak tighter. Dew glistens on the grass, and your boots leave damp prints on the packed soil. The longhouse behind you breathes out smoke from its hole in the roof. The fire within still warm from the early cookpot. On you, the village moves at half its usual rhythm. A boy chases a chicken with none of the usual laughter. A woman hangs fish to dry but glances nervously toward the path to the sea. Something is coming, and everyone knows it. There's no formal announcement, no horn, no proclamation from the jarro. Just a whisper passed from hand to hand. The lookout saw sails. No one rushes, but no one is idle either. You follow the slow current of motion to the edge of the village, where a narrow, well-worn path leads uphill, between scrub and wildflowers, to a watchpost fashioned from timber and stone. It is not tall, but it doesn't need to be. The hill does the work. From here, you can see the long curve of the fjord, the thin gray line of sea on the horizon, and the darker smudge moving against it. A ship. No ships. Their sails are squares of faded red, patched and rippling in the morning wind, too far to see any markings, too far to tell if they are friend or foe. But no one takes chances, not in the 9th century. The jar arrives at last, accompanied by 2 men with axes, strapped to their backs. They stand beside you silently. He doesn't ask questions. He simply watches. His face is unreadable, weathered as old bark. He says only, "It may be traders, or it may not." Then he turns and walks away. Back in the village, preparations begin without panic, but with purpose. Children are gathered into homes. The weakest animals, goats, hens, a prized hunting hound, are led into sheltered spaces. Men gather their weapons, spears, axes, and a few well-kept swords. Not everyone owns one. Iron is precious. Many carry only knives. You are handed a spear, its point freshly sharpened. It feels heavy, real, and terribly final. No one tells you what to do. They don't need to. You follow the others to the outer fence. A crude wall of logs and woven branches reinforced with stones. It won't stop a proper force, but it's something. The warriors fan out. You are among them. And then you wait. The wind carries every creak and rustle. Your breath fogs in the cool air. Somewhere, a raven caws once and is silent. This is not a battle, not yet. It is the long, trembling breath before ours pass. The ships draw nearer. Through the thinning mist, you can make out the shapes more clearly now. Long ships, unmistakable. Dragon heads at the prow, shields lashed along the sides, oars cutting the water in steady rhythm. Still no banners, still no signal, but the jarro watches from the hilltop, and his hand never strays far from the hilt of his sword. And then a horn, not from your village, from the shits, a low, mournful sound that rises and falls with the wind. It is not the cry of raiders, It is not the shriek of war. It is the call of kin. A moment later, the Jarl raises his arm. The villagers do not relax, but they do not attack. The spears lower slightly. The gates remain closed, but watchful eyes peer over the wall, now not with fear, but with calculation. By midday, the ships are docked. They are not strangers, not entirely. These are coastal kin, perhaps a cousin of the Jarl, or a second son returning from distant trade. Their ships are heavier than warships, laden with crates, sacks, and the smells of other lands, dyes, spices, tools, iron nails, and Baltic furs. But not all aboard are friendly. You notice eyes that scan your village with interest. Men who do not smile. One carries a hammer at his hip, not for wood, you suspect. The Jarl welcomes the leader with words too low to hear. They clasp forearms, then move aside to speak in private. And still, the village watches, even when the gates open, even when the guests disembark, even when food is shared and cups are raised. This is what you come to learn in a Viking village. Peace is not the absence of danger. It is the management of danger, a careful balance, a knowing look, a shared risk. Today, the guests are friends. Today, the village is safe, but only for now. Later, after dark, when the fires burn low and laughter fills the great hall, you notice that no one drinks deeply. No one leaves weapons far from reach. The children sleep in corners behind barrels, and the hounds are kept inside. Trust is a luxury. And in this world, luxuries are rare. You sit quietly beside the fire, a bowl of stew in your lap, and listen. As the traders speak of foreign ports, of great feasts, of winter storms in the Irish Sea, you don't understand every word. Their dialect is different, coarser, but you follow the tone. One man boasts of a raid on a monastery. Another speaks of a shipwreck, of 3 days clinging to driftwood. They live as you do, but not quite. They are not tied to land and hearth and lambing seasons. They are driftwood men carried by tide and war, and you are not sure whether to envy them or fear them. When the guests depart the next day, you feel it like a loosening in your chest, a quiet that settles back in. The villagers return to their tasks. The animals are released. Spears lean back against the wall, but the fence remains reinforced. The watchman remains at his post, and the wind still carries salt. You have survived another day, but it has reminded you of something important. In the Viking world, danger does not roar. It waits. It watches, and it arrives not with drums, but with oars. The wind changes before the sky does. Long before the first snow touches the ground, the village begins to slow. Animals grow quieter. Boots leave darker prints in the morning frost. Breath clouds hang longer in the air. It is not sudden. Winter arrives like an old friend walking steadily from a far hill. You see them coming long before they arrive, and still they catch you unprepared. You rise earlier now, not out of obligation, but because the cold seeps through the thatch and into your bones. And staying beneath the firs feels somehow dishonest. Everyone is working. There is no time for idleness in these days before the snow. The men mend fishing nets and chop wood. The women dry herbs and preserve what little fruit remains. Even the children are given tasks: feeding chickens, braiding rope, stirring pots of thick, bubbling stew. You are sent to the woods to help gather firewood, not the grand, cinematic chopping of trees you imagined from stories, but patient, persistent collection: twigs, branches, dry pinnacones, birch bark. It is not glorious work. It is essential, and it is slow. Every step through the woods crunches loud, echoing like a drumbeat in the stillness. Birds no longer sing. The forest is not asleep, but watchful. Your breath hangs in the air like a question. Back at the longhouse, a hush falls over the room as the hearth is lit, not with grandeur, but care. Firewood is not wasted here. It is earned. Flames take their time rising. People gather around with bowls in hand, eyes heavy but content. A woman places a blanket over an elder's shoulders. A child falls asleep near the warmth, clutching a carved wooden horse. There is a rhythm now. You know when to speak and when not to. You know when the goats need turning, when the root cellar needs sweeping. You know how many turns of the sun until the next smoked fish must be unstrung and eaten. You are no longer a guest here. But winter tests everything. One morning, a storm comes suddenly. The wind howls through the thatch like a beast with no name. The shutters rattle, snow comes sideways. There is no going outside. You help seal cracks with straw. You keep the fire alive. You listen. It is in that stillness, the enforced stillness, that stories begin. They do not begin with once upon a time. They begin with my grandfather saw this or my mother told me that. They begin with a breath and end with silence. One tale tells of a white fox who guards a sacred hill, another of a woman who sings the frost into flowers. There is one about a drowned village beneath the ice, whose bells you can hear if you press your ear to the well. You listen with your hands around a steaming cup, the warmth grounding you. Later, you are handed a spindle. At first, you resist. It feels out of place in your hands, but the old woman says nothing, only sits beside you and spins her own thread. In silence, the wool is soft, springy. Your fingers are clumsy, but slowly, very slowly, you find a rhythm. Even spinning can be a kind of prayer here. That night, you sleep near the hearth. The wind howls still, but the fire holds. And when you dream, it is not of your old life, not of phones or streets or familiar lights. You dream of snow and stone and bread rising in the dark. You dream of braids and runes and candlelight. Dream of silence, but it is no longer empty. It is full. The days grow darker still. In this northern village, winter is not measured in months, but in how long a candle burns before it gutters out. The sun barely lifts above the horizon now, just a pale streak of orange before it dips back into the clouds. And in this long hush of season, something else begins to settle into you. The sense of self. You no longer look for mirrors. There are none. You no longer expect to hear your old name, because it has not been spoken in weeks. Here you are, someone else. And though you do not know when it happened, the moment has come when someone shouts that new name across the courtyard, and you turn your head not with surprise, but with instinct. You belong, but what does that mean? Belonging here is not comfort. It is not ease. It is duty. The village expects things from you now. You are no longer the outsider with wide eyes and clumsy fingers. They hand you tools without instruction. They call you to lift, to haul, to listen. They trust you with firewood, with stew, with children too small to walk. You do not get praise for this. You do not get thanks. You get nods, small ones, the kind that matter. One morning, the old blacksmith calls for you. He is not a grand man, stooped, sooty, soft-spoken, but when he places something in your hand, a knife, he says, he shaped for you, your throat tightens unexpectedly. The handle is simple, ash wood, the blade sharp and short. It is yours now, and with it a weight. You are no longer trying to survive. You are expected to serve. That afternoon, a stranger arrives in the village, a trader, perhaps, or a cousin from a far farm. He is wrapped in sealskin, his beard frozen with salt. You watch him from across the hearth as he speaks with the elders. His voice is foreign, his hands quick. He laughs too loudly. You realize, with a pang of something strange, that you do not trust him, that you are protective of this place. At night, while mending a torn sleeve by firelight, an elder asks your name. You say it without thinking, your old one. He frowns gently, then asks again. You pause. You say your new name. He nods once, then says, "That's better." The silence after is deep and still. A kind of approval, a kind of rebirth. That night, you cannot sleep. You rise and walk out into the cold. The snow crunches beneath your feet, and stars press low overhead, heavy and close. You walk past the empty chicken coop, past the boat pulled up for winter. You stop at the edge of the woods, where the wind hums like a breath held too long. You Whisper your name aloud. The new one. It does not sound strange. You realize that, somehow, you have been reshaped. Not erased, not replaced, but grown in a new direction. Like a tree bent by wind, but still growing toward the sun. The first snow that settles is soft, feather-light, falling in lazy spirals. It brushes the rooftops, the fence posts, the shoulders of cloaks. Children laugh and chase one another across the commons, scooping up handfuls of powder, leaving behind strange, short trails like forgotten runes. But winter does not stay gentle for long. Within days, the sky turns to iron, the snow thickens, wet and heavy, then freezes hard as stone. Doors are harder to push open in the morning, breath hangs longer in the air. The chickens stop laying, the goats refuse to come out of their shelter. The entire village begins to curl inward, like leaves pulled tight against the wind. And then, the worst sign, the ravens return. You spot them one morning at the tree line, 3, perhaps 4, perched in complete stillness, staring toward the longhouse. They make no sound. They do not flinch. They are simply there. The villagers notice too. An elder murmurs a short prayer beneath her breath. A child is pulled quickly back into the warmth of the hearth. No one says what they fear. But the air thickens with expectation. Something is coming, something more than snow. That night, the dogs begin to bark. You wake to confusion, voices raised, a banging at the door. When you step out into the night, the wind slices through your tunic like knives. The village is half awake, men and women wrapped in cloaks, holding torches. Someone's goat is missing, blood on the snow, just a smear, but fresh. The tracks lead to the edge of the woods, large, not a fox, not a dog. The elders argue in low voices. Some say wolves, some say worse. A hunting party is formed. You are handed a spear. This is not ceremonial. This is not a game. You move through the trees in a line, torchlight bouncing off frozen trunks. Snow crunches beneath your boots, loud in the hush. A crow calls once, then falls silent. And then something moves, not close, but fast. You raise your weapon, but nothing appears. Only the wind, only the echo of branches shifting. But the blood trail grows thicker. Eventually, the hunters find the goat, or what is left of it. Torn but not eaten, not completely, and nearby, something worse. A carved symbol in the bark of a tree, old, deep, unfamiliar. One of the hunters mutters a word you do not know. Another makes the sign. Against evil, you return to the village with nothing but silence. The following day, the priest gathers the people in the longhouse. Candles are lit, offerings are made, bread, mead, a lock of hair. Not all things walk in daylight, the priest says, and not all things that walk are men. That night, the village sleeps in shifts. You hold your spear beside the hearth. The fire cracks. The snow falls. And in the woods, somewhere beyond the last fence post, something waits. The morning after the vigil is gray and still. Snow coats the rooftops like quiet thoughts. And the only movement comes from smoke curling gently from the longhouse roof. Inside, the hearth is banked with embers. No one speaks much over breakfast. You are tired, not just from the broken night, but from something deeper, a weariness you cannot name. The way fear settles into the joints, quiet, but unshakable. Still, life continues. Outside, the chores resume with slower hands. A boy gathers wood with red fingers. A woman pours slops for the pigs, face turned away from the forest. The chickens are kept close. The goats do not wander far. Even the dogs seem subdued, sniffing the air with quiet concern. You are sent with 2 others to fetch water from the stream. The bucket handle digs into your palm. Ice lines the water's edge in broken rings, like old pottery. As you stoop, something catches your eye. Smoke. Not the familiar kind from the longhouse hearth. This is distant. Then, just above the trees, you freeze. The others see it too. No one speaks. But without agreeing, you follow. The path curves away from the known woods, toward the land the villagers call Halfgamel, the half-old. Not forbidden exactly, just not favored. The snow here is undisturbed, save for the occasional print of hare or fox. Moss creeps up the trees in strange patterns, and stones lie half buried in the earth like bones. You have the sense of walking in someone else's memory. And then you see it, a small clearing ringed by leaning trees, a stone circle, half collapsed, and in its center a fire, but no one tends it. The smoke rises from beneath a cauldron set on blackened stones, bubbling faintly. There are herbs scattered nearby, not in bundles but in strange shapes, ash circles, feather piles, carved wooden talismans. A whisper moves through the branches, not words, more like breath. The others want to leave. You want to stay. Something about the fire feels familiar, like a forgotten dream, but your companion pulls your arm. "This is not for us," he says, and you believe him. You leave as the smoke curls upward. Back in the village, the priest listens to your tale with closed eyes. He says little, only murmurs. Old fire still burns even under snow. He sprinkles something into the hearth at night, crushed berries, a pinch of salt, a prayer too old for Latin. And then he sleeps with his hand on the hilt of his knife. That night, the forest is quiet, but the wind carries the scent of herbs you do not know. And you dream of a voice singing in a tongue you've never heard, in a place you cannot find on any map. You wake before dawn, heart beating slow and heavy, and you are not sure whether you are afraid or comforted. Dawn brings no sun, only wind. It slides down from the high ridges in long, hollow breaths, bending the trees as if whispering secrets into their roots. The village rises later than usual. Sleep lingers on the faces of the people, and the fire in the longhouses. Slow to catch. Today is not an ordinary day. Today is Thing Day. You do not yet know the word, but you feel its weight in the way everyone moves. Fewer smiles, no idle talk. Even the dogs sense it, keeping to the edges of footpaths, ears low. The thing is the gathering of the free, a council, a court, a reckoning. No matter how small the village, every man who calls himself free must attend. So you are summoned to, as a guest, as a watcher, or perhaps as something more. You follow the others to a field outside the palisade, just beyond the burial mounds. The snow is thin here, trampled to mud beneath countless boots. At the center stands a stone, worn a pride older than the village. Around it, a circle is drawn in ash. Inside the circle, only one man may speak at a time. You learn that a theft occurred, a chicken gone missing, a loaf of bread, a small thing. But small things matter when the harvest was lean and the snow is deep. The accused stands silent, his face unreadable. An older woman wrapped in gray wool speaks with fury. Her goat was found with its throat slit. No one looks away, but no one speaks out of turn. The law speaker, an elder with long braids and a voice like gravel, recites the village laws from memory. There is no parchment, no ink, only words passed down like fire in cupped hands. You notice how the crowd shifts when certain names are mentioned, a gesture here, a narrowed glance there. The way silence falls after one man clears his throat. Politics, even here, but eventually, a judgment is reached. The thief is not denied food. That would be death, but he is cast from the warmth of the longhouse for 7 nights. He must sleep in the woodshed, work twice his usual labor, and offer a gift of penance, a carving for each home, restitution, not ruin. Justice in the Viking world is not clean. It is not about right or wrong in the ways you expect. It is about balance, about keeping the village together, no matter the frayed threads. You notice, too, that the punishment is accepted without argument. There is no outburst, no appeal, only a nod, a long, bitter glance at the sky. Later, the villagers break fast together in silence. Even the children are subdued. You sit among them, chewing dried fish and barley bread, your jaw aching from the cold. The thief sits nearby. No one speaks to him, but no one strikes him either. A boy slips him an apple. And nothing is said. As the sun dips below the pines, the circle is swept clean, ash blown away by wind, the judgment passed, the day closes like a book, and you realize something heavy in your bones. Here, survival is not just food and fire. It is community, it is compromise, it is the quiet hindrance of people bound together by more than blood. You would not have lasted, not because of the cold or the hunger, but because justice here is not about who is right. It is about what keeps the village alive. Winter does not loosen easily. It lingers like a guest who will not take the hint, settling deeper into the wood grain of the walls, freezing the breath in your nostrils, wrapping itself into every thread of clothing you own. But life does not stop for the cold. In fact, in the Viking village, winter is when life weaves its closest threads. The longhouse becomes more than shelter, it becomes a vessel for memory. Stories are told in quiet circles around the fire, and you learn that each voice carries history, not just legends of gods and monsters, but the truths of kinship, of grief, of laughter and failures. You sit beside an old woman whose fingers have forgotten strength but remember every pattern of weaving. She teaches with patience, not words, showing by doing, humming softly as her hands move. A small child leans against you, sticky with honey, and falls asleep without fear. There is no privacy here, no locked doors. The village breathes together, eats together, aches together. When one child falls ill, 3 women take turns wiping his brow. When a man injures his leg on the ice, another cuts his firewood. You begin to notice the language of glances, how an entire conversation is carried in the lift of a brow, the curl of a lip, how a shared task is begun without a word. You, with all your education, struggle to keep up. There is a ceremony one night, small and soft. A pair is betrothed. Their hands are wrapped in ribbon dyed with berries, and the priestess sings a song so old even she does not know its meaning. A horn of mead is passed. Each villager drinks, then touches the joined hands, a blessing in silence. You are invited to stand near the fire, not because you belong, but because you are beginning to understand what belonging looks like. It is not affection, it is not agreement, it is staying when someone needs you. It is sharing what little you have, even when you do not have enough. In your world you thought strength was loud, that it wore armor unshouted from podiums. But here you begin to see that strength is often quiet. It is a woman stitching a broken coat for a neighbor who never thanked her. It is a child offering their only toy to a crying friend. It is a man teaching a stranger how to get a fish, even though his hands ache with cold. And perhaps the most startling thing is this: you are starting to care. You feel it when a baby wails in the night and you wake before the mother. You feel it when the boy who once feared you offers you the last dried apple in his pouch. You feel it when the woman who never spoke to you places a hand on your shoulder and says only, "You work well." You did not come here to love these people, but you are beginning to, and that might be your undoing. Because in the Viking world, loss is not rare. It is the other side of the fire. And when the time comes, and it will, you will not be spared. But for now, you are warm, you are fed, and you are part of something. However briefly, the day begins with salt in the air, not just from the dried fish hanging in the rafters or the brine-soaked barrels in the storehouse, but from the sea itself. Wild, vast, restless, today beckons. You are roused before dawn by a knock, softer than usual. A young man stands at your door, eyes red from sleeplessness, but shining with purpose. "We launch today," he says, and you know what he means without needing more. Outside, the sky is still gray with the hush of early morning. Mist curls around the hulls of boats pulled close to shore. Men move like shadows, checking lines, inspecting sails, loading goods wrapped in waxed cloth. The longship, low, lean, and waiting, cuts a silhouette like a blade across the tide. Not all will go. Some stay behind to tend the village, the animals, the hearths, but enough are, weaving that you feel it, an absence in advance. Laughter is quieter this morning. Footsteps are heavier. Hugs linger. The sea, to the Vikings, is not just a place, it is a god, a grave, a gate. You are handed a bundle of dried meat, a roll of oiled cloth, and a carved token, a tiny figure, shaped like a dragon, meant to protect travelers. A silent gesture from a woman whose name you still don't know, though she patched your sleeve when you tore it on the fence. When the boat pushes off, it is as if breath is held across the village. You do not board. You remain on shore, standing beside elders and children, watching the longship glide away, oars dipping in unison, sails still furled in the light wind. It makes no sound but the steady rhythm of departure, and it is then that you feel it. The ache. Not because you wish to be on the boat. You are no sailor, but because you understand, suddenly, that this is not just a voyage. It is risk. Those who leave may not return. The sea is not tamed. Storms come without warning. Raiders wait. Behind unfamiliar cliffs, sickness spreads in tight spaces. A voyage can make a man rich or disappear him without a trace. And every person on that boat is someone's son, someone's husband, someone's father. The old man beside you clears his throat softly. They always go, he murmurs, but they do not always come back. You nod, throat too tight to answer. For the rest of the day, the village is quiet. The chores are still done, the goats still need tending, the bread still needs baking. But there is a pause beneath it all, a breath held, a space left at the table, a glance toward the shore. You spend the afternoon mending nets, not because anyone asked you to, but because the work steadies your hands. Beside you, a girl barely 10 years old knots twine with practiced ease, her face unreadable. My brother went, she says after a long time, then adds, he'll be back. He promised. You do not know what to say, so you say nothing. That night, there is no feast, no dancing, just quiet talk by firelight and early sleep. You lie awake on your bed of straw, listening to the sea beyond the hills. It sounds closer tonight. It always does when someone is gone. And you wonder, not for the first time, how people live with this endless rhythm of parting and waiting, of loving in the face of leaving. And yet, they do. Every time. There are mornings when the sky holds its breath, and this is one of them. You awaken before the sun crests the hills, but the light is different, thicker, quieter. When you push aside the woolen curtain covering your narrow window, you find the world has turned pale. Snow has fallen in the night, not heavily, but enough to dust the rooftops, and the trees in fine white, like powdered sugar on a loaf of black bread. The forest beyond the village has turned into something strange, familiar yet changed, its branches coated in white like bleached antlers. Smoke curls slowly from every chimney. There is no wind, even the birds are silent. You dress slowly, thoughtfully. The linen underlayer is chilled, the wool tunic coarse, but warm. You wrap the long cloak about your shoulders and pull the hood. Low outside, your breath fogs the air in soft clouds. Witherford is hushed. The morning chores are quieter. Boots crunch softly on the frozen mud. A boy feeds the chickens more gently. Even the dogs seem to bark less. Winter has not yet gripped the land with cruel fingers. But it is close. You feel it in your bones. The kind of stillness that precedes a storm. At the manor, the hearth is already blazing. You warm your hands near the flame, nodding to the steward, who mentions that the mountain passes will soon close. The merchant from the southern road came through last night, his wagon caked with snow, his eyes tired. He speaks of strange things in the hills, of a monastery burned, of bells heard at night when none are near. Lord Theobald listens in silence, his expression unreadable. You note the tightness in his jaw. After the merchant leaves, he turns to you and says softly, "It begins again. You don't ask what. You don't have to." That afternoon, you walk the edges of the village, past the frozen creek where children once played, through the silent fields where the stalks of wheat have long been gathered, and only dark stubble remains toward the old shrine half hidden by brambles, where offerings of apples and oats have turned to frost-laced rot. There you pause. A single crow sits atop the weathered stone cross. It watches you without fear. There is something in the air, a pressure, as if the past is closer now than before. When you return, you find a scroll waiting for you. It bears a wax seal, not of your house, but of the order, the ancient one, the brotherhood to which you once belonged, the one whose sigil still hangs on your old surcoat, tucked away in the bottom of your chest. You break the seal with slow fingers. Inside, the letter is written in a hand you recognize, a hand you never expected to see again. Sir Godric, it reads, "We have need of you." The rest is brief, a summons to a place you once knew, a ruined outpost far to the north, beyond the Wolf Hills. The handwriting wavers in places, as if written in cold or fear. You sit with the letter in silence for a long time. Outside, the snow begins again, just a flurry at first, then heavier. You feel the old part of you stir, the part that once rode into battle beneath a black banner, the part that never fully slept. That night you cannot rest. You walk the halls of the manor, checking the watchfires. You pause at the window that faces the distant hills. The sky is low and white. The stars are gone. In the chapel, the sword waits upon the altar. You kneel, not as a lord, not even as a knight, but as a man who once believed in something greater, and may yet do so again. It began with a hush. Not the hush of a peaceful night, nor the quiet of a chapel at prayer, but a deeper, older stillness. A stillness that clung to the land and softened the edges of all things. The birds stopped singing. The creek slowed to a crawl beneath crusts of ice. Even the wolves, once bold and crying under the moon, fell silent. The first snow came late. It drifted down in lazy spirals, not with fury, but with purpose, blanketing the puffs, dulling the sound of hooves and hammer alike. In the village, fires were stoked high and early. The garden beds, now little more than frozen memories of growth, disappeared beneath the white. The fences, the rooftops, the wheelbarrows left by sheds, all vanished under the soft, indifferent cover of winter. Inside the longhouse, breath showed in the air. The hearth was never allowed to die at night. Someone always tended the embers. A youth, a grandmother, a man too weary to sleep. Without the fire, they would not last. You, too, learned the rhythm of the cold, the way boots must be warmed, the forewarned, lest your toes go numb, the way snow must be shoveled from rooftops to prevent collapse, the way water left untouched in buckets overnight turned solid. Time, in the cold months, was not kept by sun or moon, but by how long it took wood to burn. The village's stores were carefully rationed. Barley from the last harvest was boiled into thick porridge, ladled into wooden bowls, and shared around. The fire, cabbages, pickled in salt, offered their sour bite to meals that lacked color. The dried fish tasted of smoke and salt, a reminder of warmer times beside the fjord. But as the weeks wore on, even the most generous cellars grew bare. The children stopped asking for more. The dogs grew lean, and every morning there was a quiet count of who stirred and who did not. One morning, the village elder, a woman with more winters behind her than most had years ahead, failed to rise. She had gone softly, as gently as a candle blown out. Her body was wrapped in linen and carried to the sacred grove, where the ground had to be broken with axes and fire. She was not the last. The cold has a way of humbling the proudest. Even the warriors, once eager for sparring and boasting, now spent their days binding firewood, mending cloaks, and praying for spring. There were no raids in winter, no feasts, only endurance, only silence. You helped where you could, carrying water from the stream, now cruel task of hacking through ice, splitting logs until your hands blistered, then blistered again, sitting with the sick, singing to the children, listening to old stories told in low voices, with flickering eyes and shaking hands. And sometimes you walked alone, through the snow-choked paths past the tree line, into the woods where frost clung to every branch. You walked not to hunt, but to remember, or perhaps to forget. The silence there was complete, only the crunch of your boots, the mist of your breath, and something in the hush of the forest that watched you, not unkindly, but knowingly, as if the land itself understood your grief and waited with you for warmth to return. In one of these walks, you stumbled upon a fallen stag, antlers tangled in brush, flanks torn by wolves, the snow red beneath, and beside it, tracks, not animal, not entirely, bare feet, human-shaped, but wrong, too long, too thin, leading deeper into the pines. You did not follow. Instead, you knelt beside the dead creature, placed your hand on its still flank, and whispered the old words you had heard the elder speak once, words in a tongue you didn't know you remembered. The forest was silent, but somehow you felt it heard. That night, the dreams returned. You stood in the snow, barefoot, unafraid. The woman in the cloak of stars stood across from you, no longer whispering, but singing. Her voice did not echo, but sank into the ground like seed into soil behind her. The trees bowed, not to her, but to you, and when you awoke, your bed was warm, the hearth still lit, and your heart quiet. Spring was still far away. The snow would fall again. The hunger would return, but so would you. You were a night. You were part of this place now, and this place, cold and cruel though it could be, was beginning to accept you in return. The first sign of spring did not come with sunshine or flowers, but with sound. It was faint at first, so soft you almost mistook it for memory, a trickle, a whisper, water running somewhere beyond the frozen fields, beneath a crust of snow and soil. The ice was breaking. No one spoke of it, not at first, as if words might scare it away. But the signs began to gather. The smoke from chimneys no longer rose in desperate black columns, but in gentler plumes. The frost that had clung to the thatch like iron lace began to weep at midday. Boots no longer froze stiff overnight, and when you breathed in, the air still bit, but no longer drew blood. Then one morning, the snow on the rooftops was simply gone. The villagers did not cheer. They moved slowly, cautiously, like animals emerging from dens. The memory of hunger clung to them like shadow. But there was something else too, a stirring, a pulse in the ground. Children were the first to act. They ran into the slushy yard with sticks, splashing through muddy patches. They shouted about puddles and threw snowballs that melted in their hands. And you, watching from the threshold of the hall, felt something ease in your chest. A smile came more easily. Laughter did not sound so far away. The longhouse was aired out. The rushes on the floor were swept and burned. Blankets were hung on lines to chase away the damp. You carried heavy pelts outside to beat the dust from them. You dragged barrels from storage and cleaned tools that had rusted in the dark months. Life began again, not with triumph, but with chores. Then came the real work. The fields were revealed like a forgotten canvas. Beneath the snow, churned mud, rotting stubble, and hidden stones that had shifted during the freeze, the village turned its attention outward. Spades were sharpened, hoes were repaired. You joined the others in the thawing soil, shoulders bent, palms blistering once more. There was a rhythm to it, ancient and aching. Thrust, turn, breathe, pull, lift, scattered. The sun warmed your neck. Birds returned, tentative at first, then in swarms. The trees, still bare, whispered of buds to come. In the evenings, the hall smelled of herbs again, of onions, and early greens, and broth that did not taste of pure salt. The dogs barked more. The chickens laid again. Someone strummed a lyre beside the fire. And then came the planting. It was a quiet ritual, but a sacred one. Women pressed seeds into furrows with revered fingers. Children carried baskets of ash and compost. The elder, the new one, a broad-shouldered woman named Asa, walked the edge of each field, muttering prayers and pressing stones into the earth. You, too, held a small pouch of barley in your palm, As you let it fall one grain at a time, a thought struck you. This seed was a promise, a hope made physical, a bargain with the land. It did not forget that you had endured. The forest, too, began to stir. Where once you had found only silence and shadow, there were now blooms among the bracken. Deer trails reopened. The bird song returned like an old song remembered halfway through. You went walking again, not for wood or water, but because your legs ached to stretch, and your mind needed space. One morning, near the same glade where you had found the stag, you saw her again. The woman in the cloak of stars, but this time she did not speak. She only watched, and you did not approach. There was no need. You understood now. She was not a warning. She was a witness. To the cycle, to the old turning, to you. And when you blinked, she was gone. Only the trees remained there still, but beginning to green at the edges. Back in the village, you helped build a new fence. You laughed at a joke you didn't quite hear. You caught a child before he fell into a trough, and tossed him high into the air, just to hear him squeal. The thaw was not just in the soil. It was in you. You had survived the cold, but more than that, you had fought with it, and something inside you had begun to grow again. The days lengthened. It did not happen all at once. First, the nights were just a little less cruel. Then, slowly, the sky began to hold its color longer. What had once been a desperate rush to finish shores before sunset became instead an unhurried rhythm, one that gave time to watch the clouds roll or hear the last bird before dusk. By the time the equinox neared, the village began to hum with something you hadn't felt in months: joy. There was to be a feast. Not one born of harvest or victory, but one born simply from survival, from the idea that life had endured despite the winter's best efforts. The old ones called it the Feast of Light, though no one quite agreed on its origin. Some said it was pagan, others said it was Christian, and a few shrugged and said it was both, or neither. All that mattered was this: there would be music, there would be bread, and there would be fire. Preparations began a week before. The women dug deep in the larders, finding the last of the dried fruit and rye flour. The men fetched kindling and stacked great pyramids of wood at the center of the green. The children were set to gather their earliest spring blooms, primrose, crocus, and violet, to weave into garlands. You helped wherever you could. You carved pegs for trestle tables. You hauled water from the stream in great wooden buckets. You even stood still for a fidgety child as she tried to loop a flower crown over your hair. You laughed, and so did she, and for a moment you forgot your name, both your old one and your new one, and remembered only the warmth of sunlight and the tickle of petals. When the day came, the entire village gathered on the green. The tables were set with whatever could be offered: pies of onion and cheese, the roasted boar that had been smoked through winter, bread so dense it needed a knife. There was mead passed in carved cups, and songs passed between crooked-toothed minstrels. Everyone wore color, even if it was only a ribbon. The old women danced first. They clapped their hands and stomped their feet, calling out songs older than memory. Then the young ones joined, laughing, arms interlinked, skipping in circles like leaves in a whirlpool. You sat beside the fire and let your bones rest. You were not a knight here, not really. You were something else, something older than title or armor. You were part of the land now, part of the circle. A woman sat beside you. You recognized her not by name, but by rhythm. You had worked beside her in the fields, shared broth from the same bowl in the leanest weeks. She offered you a piece of honeyed oat cake. You took it, and together in silence, you watched the flames rise. Above, the stars blinked to life. No one marked the hour. Time moved differently in joy. Children ran past, trailing laughter. Someone began a ballad, low and sweet. A flute joined in. You did not sing, but you hummed. You did not dance, but you tapped your foot. For the first time since awakening in this world, you felt no ache. Not in your shoulders, not in your chest. Just warmth. And then, As the fire crackled, and the sky turned its darkest blue, someone handed you a torch. It was time. The oldest man in the village stepped forward. He spoke not with ceremony, but with memory. We light this fire not to chase away the dark, he said, but to remind it that we are still here. And so the bonfire was lit. It roared with life. Sparks jumped like stars. Smoke curled into the heavens, and faces, so many faces, were illuminated in orange and gold, eyes wide, mouths smiling, hands clasped. You stood there, torch still in hand, and felt yourself return to your body, to your breath, to this moment. The feast did not end, it faded. One by one villagers slipped away, drawn by sleep and the weight of contentment. But you remained, watching the fire, listening to the crackle. The feast was never about abundance. It was about entrance, about light, and the people who carry it. Morning came gently, like a mother's hand brushing the cheek of a sleeping child. The coals of the bonfire still smoldered, and a few early risers passed quietly around it, picking earth over the ash and collecting stray cups left in the grass. You awoke with the scent of smoke in your hair and your cloak pulled tight around your shoulders, as though some part of you had known not to go back indoors. Not yet. Today was colder, despite the sun. The warmth of the feast had passed like a dream, real and beautiful, but now filed into memory. The rhythm of daily life resumed, as it always did. Chickens needed feeding, cloth needed mending, wood needed chopping. The world moved forward. But you didn't, not yet. There was something lingering, a weight, a question. At the castle, the male rider had arrived, dust-covered and thin, his horse trembling from distance and haste. He bore a leather satchel, stiff from weather and age, filled with letters, some for lords, some for stewards, some for no one at all. They were passed out in the great hall one by one. You stood there, watching. The steward called names, scrolls, and scraps were taken in hand, tucked into belts, or opened on the spot with trembling fingers, and then silence. The bag was empty. The rider bowed, gave his thanks, and was gone. Nothing for you. Not this time. But why had you expected one? You told yourself you hadn't. You told yourself it didn't matter. But somewhere inside, a thread had tugged. You had hoped for what? You didn't know. A message from your old life, a sign, a clue, a single word that might say, "We know, you're there," but the parchment said nothing. It had not come. You stepped outside, into a wind that had teeth. The sky was pale and bruised. In the courtyard, the dogs were barking at a flock of crows. You watched them scatter. Deer smelled like rain. At the chapel, the priest was sweeping out the doorway. He paused as you passed, offered a nod, and said only some letters take longer. You smiled, not because you believed it, but because he did. You took your usual walk down the muddy path toward the edge of the woods. This had become habit now. A moment of quiet before rejoining the noise of your roll. The villagers had begun to wave as you passed, no longer whispering as they once did. To them, you were simply Godric, their knight, their own, and perhaps that was the truth of it. Perhaps a letter would never come. Perhaps the message was already here. The sky broke open then. Just briefly, a shaft of golden light through low clouds, striking the hilltop like a blessing. You stopped to watch it. It wasn't a miracle, but it was enough. You reached into your pouch and pulled out a crumpled piece of old parchment, one you'd kept. Since that first week, it bore no message, only a single symbol. You traced it with your thumb. It meant nothing, or maybe everything. That night, you sat by your window, listening to the rain. No letters, no signs, no thunderclaps of destiny. Just the quiet, and within it, a voice that didn't need to shout. The change came gradually, like breath frosting a window pane. At first, it was a faint whisper in the trees, not the playful rustle of summer wind, but something quieter, more cautious. The leaves, once lush and fluttering with youthful green, began to curl at their edges, stiffen, and drift to the earth. In soft surrender, a palette of ochre, rust, and bones spread across the land. You noticed it most in the mornings. The sun, once eager and early, now lingered just below the horizon. Its rays arrived later and weaker, casting long golden shadows across the damp flagstones. When you stepped from your bed, a bed now layered with wool and straw, your breath curled visibly in the air. The hearth, which once cooled through the night, now held a stubborn glow until morning. Embers clung to life like secrets. The manner, too, had shifted. Not with alarm, but with quiet diligence. There was no talk of panic, no rushing about, only the lone murmur of preparation, of seasoned hands working steadily, knowing the rhythm of seasons better than any calendar. You heard it in the kitchen, where pots boiled thick stews of root and meat. You saw it in the courtyard, where firewood was stacked against stone walls, each piece placed with care. The hens clucked slower now, and the hounds spent more time curled at the cook's feet. Winter had not yet arrived, but it had sent a letter ahead. In the great hall, the tapestries seemed to hang heavier. The flickering torchlight danced across the woven scenes of battles and saints, but even they seemed more subdued. Lord Theobald held longer councils now, poring over parchments with scribes and stewards. Green stores were measured again. A blacksmith was summoned to inspect ironwork on the gate. The stables were checked for draft. Nothing had broken, but everything had to be sure. Outside, the fields lay bare. The last of the root crops had been pulled, their earth still clinging in wet clods. Scarecrows leaned drunkenly in the wind. A flock of birds wheeled overhead, turning as one, then disappearing southward. You found yourself watching the sky more often now, not for signs of storms, but simply for silence, for the way the clouds moved, for whether the light had changed again. You spent more time in the chapel. It wasn't for prayer, necessarily, though you did kneel. It was the quiet, the cold echo of your boots on stone, the soft creak of old wood as you sat. The chapel felt like the still heart of the manor. Here time moved slower still. You lit a candle not for fear, but for steadiness, and you left it burning long after you'd gone. At night, the wind curled around the walls with a new edge, not angry, but testing, probing. You lay in bed and listened to the crackle of the fire and the gentle creak of beams in the ceiling above. You, somewhere in the darkness, a barn owl called one long note, then silence. Even the dreams had shifted. You no longer dreamed of swords or courts. Now it was simpler things, frost on windows, the crunch of snow under boots, the heat of bread fresh from the oven. A dream once showed you a child's mitten dropped in the snow. You awoke with an ache in your chest you couldn't name. The villagers had begun making candles. It was not a festive act, but a practical one. Beeswax melted and poured into molds, set near the hearth to harden. They would be needed soon, for winter nights were long and fire was a kind of prayer. One morning, before dawn had broken, you rode out to the ridge that overlooked the valley. From that height, you could see Witherford in full. The clustered roofs, the winding stream, the patchwork fields fading into fog. It looked still, wrapped in sleep. You set your horse in silence and watched as the light slowly climbed the hills. No snow yet, no ice, just the cold breath of the land, waiting. Winter had not yet come, but neither had it forgotten you. It began with a paw print, a single print, pressed deep into the damp earth just beyond the outer fence where the cattle grazed, larger than any hound's, and not alone. You leaned over it, the early morning light slanting over your shoulder, and traced the outline with your eyes. 3 more leading toward the trees. Then Don, the boy who found them, hadn't screamed. He'd only pointed, his face pale, eyes wide. The wind stirred the tall grass around him, as though whispering a secret. By the time you reached the edge of the wood, the mist was still clinging to the ground, curling low like smoke. The trees stood tall and brittle, their autumn leaves having mostly surrendered. Twigs snapped underfoot. Somewhere in the branches above, a jay cried sharply, not in fear, but in warning. Wolves were not unknown here. The older men spoke of them with a kind of solemn respect. as one might speak of the coal or the river, inevitable, dangerous, but part of the order of things. Yet this felt different. This felt like a test. The villagers had already begun murmuring, not out of panic, but with the cautious rhythm of people who know stories passed down for too many winters. A child had seen yellow eyes in the dark. A farmer's dog wouldn't leave the hearth. The night watch swore he heard a howl low and long from somewhere near the burial stones. No one had seen the beast directly, but everyone felt it. You tightened the straps on your cloak and took to the path at dusk. It was foolish, perhaps. The forest was no place for wandering alone at twilight, especially with something out there waiting. But you were a knight, and there are moments when titles must become actions. The air was cold in your throat. Your sword hung at your side, a comforting weight. Each step deeper into the trees was like descending into an older world. Here, the light dimmed quickly. The sun did not reach far between the trunks. You passed mossy stones, ancient stumps, a tangle of roots that gripped the earth like fingers. Somewhere an owl stirred. The leaves beneath your boots were soft, muffling your approach. You found nothing, and that, somehow, was worse. Nothing but the sense of being watched. You returned just after nightfall, your boots muddy and your hands cold. In the great hall, fire danced in the hearth, casting shifting light on the walls. You said nothing of what you had not found, but when the steward asked if the gate should be barred for the night, you nodded once, firmly. That evening, the village was quiet. No music, no laughter spilling from doorways. Only the creak of shutters closed a little tighter. Mothers keeping children closer. Candles burning lower. At the chapel, you knelt again. Not in fear, but in recognition. There are forces that live close to the skin of the world, not evil always, just wild, old, and moved by prayers or titles. And tonight, one of them breathed against the borders of your quiet life. Later, wrapped in wool and fur, you stared into the fire and listened. Then a sound, far off, faint but real, a howl, long, low, and lonely, not near, but not far either. Wolf was not just in the woods. It was coming closer. The frost came early that year. It edged the thatch rooftops in silver by the time the village stirred, turned breath to fog even in the noonday sun, and left the wooden water troughs rimmed with delicate ice by twilight. The trees had long shed their leaves. Only the skeletal arms of oaks and ash reached into the pale sky now, creaking softly in the wind like voices too old to rise. You could feel the weight of winter before it arrived fully. It pressed against the windows, slipped beneath the door frames, tightened joints, and made the hearth fire seem a little more sacred each night. People spoke less, they worked faster, and they watched the tree line. The wolf had not returned, or perhaps it never left. No livestock had gone missing, no dogs killed, but still there were tracks. Always one or two along the outer paths, always just out of reach, a watcher in the shadows. It was as if it waited not for food, but for weakness. And in winter, weakness comes quickly. The old fell ill first. A fever crept through the village with the cold, stealing strength from those who had little to spare. You visited the healer's hut more days than not, carrying broth, sometimes just sitting with the dying. You didn't always know what to say, but your presence, brought a steadiness that mattered. Then came the storm. It rolled over the hills one afternoon like a siege, winds howling louder than wolves ever could. The snow came sideways, sharp and blinding. The castle gates were closed early. The villagers huddled near their hearths, and even the hounds refused to go out. The storm lasted 3 days. When it passed, the world outside had changed. Trees had fallen across paths. Drifts of snow reached the windowsills. The cold had found its way into every crack, every corner. And in the quiet that followed, when the sun broke through at last, came the true reckoning. A child was missing. His name was Osric, barely 6. Last seen near the fence, chasing after a chicken that had bolted in the wind. His tracks led out of the yard and into the white You didn't hesitate. With 2 villagers and a borrowed hound. You followed the trail. Your cloak snapped in the wind, the snow reached past your knees, every breath was ice. But step by step, you pressed into the white wilderness, toward the trees, and there, deep in the woods. At the base of a low rise, you found him. Cold, afraid, but alive. Beside him in the snow, a circle of disturbed ground, paw prints, and a single bloody feather. The boy said he'd been chased by something, then shielded. He said a dog, large, silent, with glowing eyes, had stood between him and the forest and moving until he heard your voices and ran. He said the dog looked at him like it knew his name. You carried him home on your back. The village exhaled as one when you returned. The storm had broken the world open, but it had not taken the boy. That night there was fire in every hearth, candles in every window, not celebration, but defiance. A quiet kind of strength. And far in the woods, on a rise where the snow was undisturbed, a wolf stood alone and watched. Then turned and vanished into the trees. Spring did not come quickly to the village. It crept, hesitant and slow, like a visitor unsure if they were welcome. The snow melted in size, not floods. Icicles wept quietly from the eaves, and the once hard earth softened with reluctance beneath boot and hoof. It was not warmth that arrived first, but light, longer days, paler skies, shadows that stretched just a little later before they vanished into dusk. You spent those weeks in quiet labor, repairing fences toppled by the storm, helping roof thatch be replaced, visiting the elderly who had survived the fever, but not without frailty. Life resumed in fragments, mending cloaks, sharpening tools, hauling barrels. And though the wolf was not seen again, it remained a presence in the stories now told beside every hearth. Some called it a guardian, others still whispered of a curse, but always it was remembered. Lord Theobald, too, was fading. His steps were slower, his voice quieter. One evening, by the fire in his small chamber, he summoned you. I've watched many winters, he said, eyes on the flames, more than I ever thought I would. But I won't see another. You tried to protest, but he raised a hand, calm and gentle. I've made peace with time, he continued, and I've made arrangements. The land, the keep, they will need someone who remembers more than just names and borders, someone who understands that duty is not command, but care. You said nothing at first, only sat with him, the fire crackling between you. But your silence was not resistance, it was reverence. In the weeks that followed, preparations began, not just for his passing, but for the passing of a mantle. You rode with the steward to nearby villages. You attended council with the reeve. You walked the keep's perimeter at dawn, as Lord Theobald once did, counting stones not out of necessity, but memory. When the old lord passed, quietly in his sleep, beneath the same woven blanket his wife had made decades earlier, the bell was rung only once, not in mourning, but in gratitude. The burial was simple, a stone set near the chapel wall. No grand tomb, no gold, only a carved oak cross and a scattering of spring's first snowdrops. And then it was yours. The keep, the land, the people, the long walk of the seasons. You did not seek it, you did not ask, but it came to you as the sword had come, as the dreams had come, as the forest itself had come, not in noise or thunder, but in quiet, steady certainty. Years passed, and with them peace. There were hardships still, lean harvests, aching winters, the occasional squabble at the mill, but the village endured. Children grew. The blacksmith's apprentice took over the forge. A new heel arrived, younger and sharper-eyed. Life did not stay still, but it stayed. You never returned to your old world. Perhaps you could not. Perhaps the magic, if it was magic, had only ever meant to deliver you here, not take you back. Or perhaps you stopped looking, because in time, this was your world, not as a visitor, not as a dreamer, but as a knight, a steward, a keeper of stories. And when at last your own time came, when your hands were worn and your hair silvered, and the fire no longer needed tending by you but by those you had taught. You walked the village once more, slowly, quietly, taking in the rhythm of days, and the children who ran past called you not by title, but by name. Godric, a name you had not chosen, but had become yours, utterly. And as the final dusk settled over Witherford, and the mist rose from the trees as it always had, you sat beneath the old oak by the chapel, and closed your eyes, not in sorrow, but in peace. Because in the end, you had not just survived the medieval world, you had lived in it. Fully. Gently. And while